Malcolm Turnbull. A great scoop today in the Australian newspaper that should shame him, but also shame the Liberals who decided to make him our Prime Minister. It's about how Turnbull tried to involve the Governor-General to save him last year from being dumped as Prime Minister. You know, we really have to be a lot more careful about the characters we do make Prime Ministers. In fact, our politicians should be much, much more careful, because look at the unbelievable ones they've had leading them and us. Incredible. Before Turnbull, there was, of course, Labor's Kevin Rudd, a man so strange that even his own ministers publicly attacked him as selfish and mean and undisciplined and chaotic and arrogant. I don't know why Christopher Pyne was up there, but you get the picture. And then came Malcolm Turnbull. Now, I warned on day one, the Liberals were mad to make another self-obsessed man our Prime Minister. And now we're starting to see just how me this man really is and was. Last August, it was absolutely clear that Malcolm Turnbull was finished as Prime Minister. He'd lost every poll for nearly 2 years. His global warming crusade, his national energy guarantee, had just collapsed. And when Turnbull then called a surprise snap leadership vote, knowing that Peter Dutton, Home Affairs Minister, was on his tail, he won so narrowly over Dutton, 48 votes to 35. It was clear that he was just too damaged to survive. A new leadership vote was inevitable, and Turnbull indeed had to call it. Now, a normal man putting his party first would do the right thing, go with grace. Not Turnbull. And certainly not according to this excellent account today by Paul Kelly, an account that Turnbull this afternoon did not dispute. Turnbull instead put himself first, in my opinion. Not his party, not his country, himself. He tried to hang on to his job for a little longer by telling ministers that Governor-General Sir Peter Cosgrove would never swear in Peter Dutton as Prime Minister. So the Liberals certainly couldn't make him their leader, could they? That was his argument. And Turnbull made some think that he'd actually talked to the Governor-General about this. Here is how Kelly reports Turnbull's conversation with Attorney-General Christian Porter. Turnbull told Porter the Governor-General would not commission Dutton if he were elected leader of the Liberal Party because of doubts about Dutton's eligibility to sit in the Parliament due to an alleged conflict with Section 44 of our Constitution relating to his wife's childcare business receiving a government subsidy. The inference, as Paul Kelly keeps going, in Mr Turnbull's remark was obvious that he'd already spoken to Sir Peter. In fact, Porter said, he asked Turnbull, has the Governor-General told you this? And Turnbull just said, in a knowing way, according to Kelly, I know the Governor-General. I know this would be his position. Oh, really? In fact, a spokesman for the Governor-General said conversations between the Governor-General and the Prime Minister are necessarily private and confidential. I can, however, confirm that no formal advice was sought or provided to the office in relation to any eligibility issues. Now, Christian Porter, Attorney-General, didn't think Peter Dutton was ineligible to be Prime Minister, and he got advice, or ineligible to be a politician indeed, and he got advice from the Solicitor General saying that he didn't think so either. What was the problem? He also told Malcolm Turnbull it was none of the Governor-General's business to stop someone being sworn in as Prime Minister because he had a hunch that a challenge to the High Court might find Peter Dutton ineligible to sit. Here's Porter today about standing up to Malcolm Turnbull.
The job of the Attorney-General is to provide advice that he or she considers is accurate and legally correct, and sometimes that advice is not always what people want to hear.
Peter Dutton today was grateful to Porter.
He looked at what needed to be done as the Attorney-General of our country, and he saw inappropriate behaviour taking place. He called it out, he stood up to it, and you're right, it was a gutsy move, and I think he deserves full credit for it.
And, you know, I doubt that Turnbull really did think Dutton was ineligible to sit in Parliament. High Court would throw him out. And why? Because we already know from David Spears' documentary here on Sky this week that Turnbull, again to save his job, offered to make Dutton the Deputy Liberal leader if he only dropped his challenge, or so Dutton says.
I said to him that this was just, given what had just taken place, that wasn't credible. And it wasn't his to gift either.
Now, Turnbull denies he made that offer. Who knows? But what a snake pit. What a snake pit. Now, as it turns out, it wasn't Dutton who replaced Turnbull that week in August. It was Scott Morrison, who went on to win the election, despite Malcolm Turnbull publicly attacking government policy and backing a candidate, Julia Banks, who stood against the Liberal minister. And you know how all this looks to me? That Malcolm Turnbull would have burned down the joint, burned down the Liberal Party, just to cling to a few more months of power. So, what does Turnbull, the great Republican, Republican, say about trying to involve the Governor-General, the Queen's man, in a cheap scheme to save his own skin? This afternoon, he didn't deny any of it. In a string of tweets, he instead defended what he'd done, saying the discretion to swear in a person as Prime Minister is vested in the Governor-General. The proposition advanced by Mr Porter that is none of the Governor-General's business whether the would-be PM is constitutionally eligible is nonsense. The Governor-General is not a constitutional cipher. Well, Turnbull has been famously wrong before on constitutional law, and it seems he's wrong again, according to constitutional law experts like Anne Toomey, who said it would have been improper for Turnbull to advise the Governor-General not to swear in Peter Dutton as his replacement. Now, why does all this matter? After all, Turnbull is gone. Dutton didn't replace him. And we move on under Scott Morrison. And yet, there is a lesson. As I said, political parties should be much more careful about the kind of people they put up as Prime Ministers. No egomaniacs anymore. Too risky. What those guys will do to stay in power, it is frightening. We might also consider whether we should be having politically charged appointments to the Governor-General position. Can you imagine mates getting together to save one of them? Now, as for Malcolm Turnbull, choosing him was clearly a madness and a disaster for the Liberals. And today's report is the dirt on that experiment's grave.